Hello and welcome, everyone, to the webinar about presented metrics that matter to leadership. We will get started in about 30 seconds or so. I'm glad that everyone has been able to join us today for this awesome webinar that we're about to present to you guys. So we'll give it about 30 seconds, let some people roll in here, and then we'll get going. I see quite a few people coming in, which is awesome. I love seeing that. Perfect. We'll give it a few more seconds and we'll get started now. Perfect. So, welcome to Presenting Metrics that Matter to Leadership. My name is Paul Stewart. Alongside me is Steve Gregoire. I'm the account manager here at Polite Mail. Steve is our business development representative here at Polite Mail, and we are so excited to be able to present this topic to you guys. Some webinar housekeeping items. This session is going to be recorded. I will repeat, the session is going to be recorded. Everyone who has registered for this webinar will receive a copy of the recording. Participants will also receive a copy of Polite Mail's Presenting Data to Leadership Guide. And participants, you are muted. However, we do have a Q&A feature, and I do strongly encourage you guys to please ask questions along the way. We have a expert of panels, myself, Steve, and Samantha and Elisa, who will be monitoring the Q&A, and we will make sure that we get your questions answered. So with that said, let's jump right into it. So really, what is the current state of leadership in comms? Well, this slide really highlights a clear gap between leadership intent and employee experience when it comes to communications. First, you're going to see 25% of internal communicators say the biggest barrier to measured impact is the lack of leadership buy-in. This tells us the challenge isn't tools or effort, it's alignment and participation at the top. Closely related, 24% of communicators say that their top priority for improving communications is more support and involvement from leadership. Communicators don't just want approval from what we've found. They really want leaders actively engaged. And the result of this disconnect shows up clearly in alignment. Only about 9% of employees feel aligned with their organizational goals. Meanwhile, 27% of leaders believe employees are aligned. So there is a disconnect, a little bit of a disconnect there. This percentage gap really does matter. Leaders think that messages are landing, but employees are telling a very different story. Leadership communications isn't just about sending messages. It is all about visibility, consistency, and trust. When leaders are more present, measurable, and internal in communications, alignment improves, and so does the business impact. So really, what is the cost of poor communication? Poor communication isn't just an inconvenience. It has a real measurable cost to the organization. First, what it does is it drives higher stress and lower morale. When people don't have clarity, they fill the gaps themselves, and that creates anxiety and frustration across the board. It also leads to wasted resources. Teams duplicating work, redoing projects, or chasing priorities that never really were clearly defined in the first place. All that adds up to productivity loss. Time spent seeking clarification or correcting mistakes is time not spent moving that business forward. Over time, poor communication erodes employee engagement. When people don't understand the why, they disengage from the work. That disengagement often turns into a higher turnover, which is one of the most expensive outcomes for any organization. We also see that information overload is a real deal. It's a real thing. We hear about it all the time with our customers here at Polite Mail. Too many messages from too many places with no clear prioritization causes employees to tune out entirely. And then finally, weak communication increases compliance and risk issues, especially when critical messages aren't seen or understood or acted on. So really, I think poor communication really quietly drains money, time, and trust. while effective communication actually tends to protect all three of those. So why does good data still get ignored? If poor communication basically drains a company, why does good data still get ignored? Well, in today's presentation, it's really all about shifting from reporting activity to guiding decisions. The goal isn't just getting better charts, it's having a better conversation with leaders. Internal communications teams actually have a lot of data. On the left side of this slide is the internal communications reality. We're reporting on opens, clicks, views, how many people went to that channel, sends, uh, the gamut. This data tells us what happened, who saw a message, and how they interacted with it. The challenge is that this is activity data and not decision data. On the right is what leaders really actually expect from communication insights. Leaders want clarity. Did people understand the message? What are they aligned? Are they all aligned? They want risk visibility as well. What messages aren't landing? Where are we being exposed? And they want action. What should we do differently next time to make sure that these messages do land? When reports often focus on only metrics like opens and clicks, leaders tend to struggle to connect them to the outcome that matters. That's why good data often gets ignored. Not because it's wrong, but because it doesn't answer leadership questions. The shift we need to make is moving from reporting activity to delivering insights. Data should explain impact, guide decisions, and help leaders communicate more effectively, not just confirm that the message was sent. And continue along the lines of why good data still gets ignored. This slide really explains why good data often gets ignored, even when the numbers look very strong. On the left, you're going to see what I call a communicator's metrics. This tells us whether a message was delivered or consumed. We see the engagement is actually pretty good. A 67% open rate, 14% click rate. You had about 1,200 views on it. Two channels within those metrics. Sent only 3 times across 2 channels. So from a communicator standpoint, this worked. People saw it, they opened it, some even clicked on it and clicked on the links. But that's where the break, but that here's where things tend to break down. If I'm a leader or decision maker at a company, those numbers don't yet tell me what they actually mean. They answer the question, did anyone see this? But not the so what? What's next? That's what's missing on the right side of this slide. What's missing is context and direction. Why does it matter to the business? What's changed compared to before? And most importantly, what to do next without these 3 things? Even good data becomes easily ignored. There's no signal telling someone whether this is good or bad, new or old, or worth acting on. When we connect metrics to meaning and recommendations, that's when data actually influences decisions. So, what is typically reported to our leadership? On the left side, you're going to see very standard metrics table. Opens rates, click-through rates, number of emails sent, total recipients, internet views, all the good jazz. These are really familiar, measurable, and easy to report on. And usually these numbers look pretty decent. We summarize them on the right with statements like engagement was strong and the campaign performed very well, and open rates were above average. The challenge is that while those statements sound positive, they're actually very vague. If I'm sitting in a leadership role, I'm reacting to those numbers, and I'm reacting to what they didn't tell me, and what's captured in the green box. Leaderships are quietly asking. So, is this good or is this bad? Compared to what? What are these numbers good to compared to what? And ultimately, again, the so what? These metrics describe activity, but they don't provide judgment, context, or direction. There's no comparison to a benchmark, no indication of change over time, and no implications for decisions, I should say. So while this is what typically is reported, and I don't want you guys to think that this is wrong because it's not wrong. It's just incomplete. It explains what happened, but not what it means or what should happen next. The gap is where reporting often breaks down, and what we need to do to fix it is what we want data to actually drive action. So, what do leaders actually need to know? I know that's why a lot of you are here, is how to present metrics to a leader. And this is what we're hoping that you guys take out of this. I also want to pause for a second in a moment and remind you guys to please drop in your questions in the Q&A feature, the Q&A section of Zoom. We do have people monitoring that. We will get those questions answered. So, again, what do leaders actually need to know? This is the level of insight leaders actually need to know in order to make decisions. Instead of starting with metrics, this slide starts with conclusions. Employees understand sorry, my bad. Employees' understanding of the policy change increases, and managers played a critical role in driving engagement. Basically, we gave away the ending of the story. On the left is what we're seeing in data. We still include the metrics, but now they're framed as evidence. We saw 68% open rate, which is up 12 points from last quarter, and a 14% click rate. The highest performing content was the manager's toolkit, which tells us where engagement is really coming from. More importantly, employees who clicked were twice as likely to report understanding the policy change. The link engagement to comprehension not just an activity. We also saw that the internet engagement declined after week two, which signals that repeated broad messages started to lose effectiveness over time. Why does it matter? The middle column explains why it matters. Manager-led content is clearly driving clarity. At the same time, repetition without segmentation reduces engagement. This creates an opportunity to refocus messages for the remaining rollout instead of continuing with a one-size-fits-all approach. And on the right is where it becomes actionable. Our recommendations, what do we recommend? Doubling down on manager-led communications, reducing all employee sends in phase two, shifting the message from awareness to adoption, and resegmenting content to support teams that are still lagging. So instead of asking leaders to interpret the data themselves, this slide gives you exactly what they need, what's happening, why it matters, and what we should do next. You guys all know it. I feel like I'm preaching to the choir here. Executives read metrics much differently than communication majors and communication people read metrics. This slide is really a reminder that executives don't look at the metrics the same way, or analytics as I just mentioned. They're not asking what the number is, they're asking what it means for the business. There are three questions running through their heads as soon as the metrics appear. First, does it matter? Executives want to know, and I feel like I'm repeating myself, but it's true. Executives want to know if if this metric is directly tied to business goals. Does it connect to revenue cost, risk, customer impact, or strategic priorities? Is it relevant? If the relevance isn't obvious, the metric loses attention fast, and even if it's technically interesting. The why now? These are the three questions that I've mentioned before, but why now? They're looking for urgency or significance. Is this showing a trend, a change, or a risk that wasn't there before? If nothing is changing, the follow-up question becomes, why are we talking about this today? We all know that getting in front of leaders and presenting metrics to leaders, it comes with a time crunch. They're very busy. So this is a very big question to understand is the why now. And third, how will this get done? Metrics are a means, not the end. Executives want to know what decisions this supports or what actions will follow. If there's no clear direction or next step, the metrics feel incomplete. When presenting metrics to executives, something I want to remind you guys is lead with meaning, not methodology. Anchor every metric to impact, timing, and action. If you answer these three questions up front, the data works for you instead of competing for the attention. So metrics leaders care about the most. This slide shifts us from individual metrics to the buckets leaders actually care about. When leaders ask for metrics, they're usually trying to answer one of four questions, whether they say it explicitly or not. Alignment and understanding. At the basic level, leaders want to know, do people understand what's happening and what's expected of them? Is this about clarity? If the employee doesn't understand the message, or the strategy, or their role in it, nothing else on this slide really matters. Second, engagement in action. Understanding alone isn't enough. Leaders want to know if communication actually changes behavior. Are people doing something differently because of this message? This is where we move from awareness to action and where communication starts delivering real value. And then third, efficiency and reach. Here the questions become, are we communicating effectively or just more often? Leaders care about reach, but they care even more about the signal versus noise. This is what makes sure effort, time, and channels are being used wisely, not just loudly. And risk and readiness is the fourth one. This is where metrics become protective. Leaders want to understand exposure. Where are we vulnerable? Who may not be prepared? And what risk could show up because people misunderstood or ignored the message? Strong communication metrics don't try to measure everything. They focus on what leaders need to know to make decisions: clarity, action, efficiency, and risk. When your metrics align to these four areas, leaders immediately see the value in your metrics. Note, so the metrics leaders care about the most. We talk about this a lot. First, alignment understanding. One of the strongest signals that we saw was around who delivers the message. Employees who read messages that were forwarded by the managers were twice as likely to engage with follow-up content. That tells us something is important. Understanding improves more. Messaging comes from someone that people already trust and interact with. It's not just about sending information. It's really about reinforcing it through your managers. Next, engagement in action. When we compared targeted messages to all employee sends, the difference was striking. Targeted messages drove 3 times higher click engagement. This reinforces a simple idea: relevance drives action. When people see themselves in a message, when it's tailored to their role, they're far more likely to do something with it. Third, efficiency and reach. Here is where the data gives us a caution flag, if you will, the yellow flag, caution flag. Engagement peaked after the second send. Then it dropped down 27% on messages sent afterwards. So this isn't a reach problem, it's a saturation problem. Information overload. More messages didn't increase impact. In fact, they started to work against us. Be cautious of that information overload. And risk and readiness. The last insight highlights are a potential risk area. Frontline audiences showed lower read time and fewer clicks compared to office-based roles. And we all know that. That's nothing new to you guys. That creates uneven understanding across the organization. And that's where readiness risk shows up. If different groups are absorbing information at different levels, executive execution becomes inconsistent. These metrics aren't just about reporting performance, they're about guiding decisions. Use managers as multipliers. Target messages by role. Be intentional about the volume and pay close attention to the frontline access and engagement. That's how communication metrics move from interesting to actionable. And so, what does a success look like to leadership? Leaders don't measure communication success by how many messages went out. They don't care how many messages went out. They measure it by what changed afterward, what people understood, what they did, and where risk was reduced. They show up as behavior change. Here are some few ways that we track the metrics that indicate action. Awareness and understanding. First, we start with awareness. Do employees actually know what's going on? And more importantly, do they understand what, oh, sorry about that. Not sure what, oh, there we go. My bad. Do they understand what leadership is asking and why it matters? If they don't, nothing else on the side really truly works. Completion of required actions. Next, we look at the follow through. Are people completing trainings? Acknowledging messages. Are they taking the actions that we ask for? This is one of the clearest signs that communication turned into behavior. Adoption of the new tool or process. This is a big one. After we announce a change, do people actually use the new tool or follow the new process? Or do they quietly keep doing things the old way? Adoption tells us whether the messages have landed or not. Reduce repetitive questions. Another sign of success is hearing fewer of the same questions over and over again. When communication is clear, it's easy to find confusion that goes down. Or I should say, when communication is clear, we see that confusion goes down. And so does the inbox traffic to the managers or the HR department. More self-service and correct execution. We also want employees to feel confident enough to self-serve, to find answers on their own, and get things right the first time. Retention and engagement. Over time, we see something really powerful. Teams that are engaged more with leadership, communication trends tend to stick together longer. We at Polite Mail, we have a sales and marketing team of probably an average of 8 years. And it's because of our communication here at Polite Mail, we are really aligned with our leadership and our management team. So we know what they're expecting, and that helps us have longevity here at Polite Mail. And then finally, feedback ties it all together. When employees see that their input actually shows up in leadership communications, it builds trust. It shows that the communication isn't just a broadcast, it's actually a conversation. Transparency is huge. So, on this slide, I wanted to show you this slide here. This slide is really about reframing how we think about success in communication. A lot of times, opens and clicks get treated as the finish line, but they're actually just the starting point, as you see at the top. At the top of this funnel, we have engagement. Things like opens and clicks tell us someone has interacted with the message. That's pretty helpful, but it only tells us that the message was seen, not that it was understood. The next level is understanding. This shows whether the message actually landed. Do employees know what the message means? Do they understand what's expected of them? Do engagement without understanding doesn't mean the organization doesn't really move the organization forward. At the bottom of the funnel is action or decision. This is where the behavior changes. Did someone complete a task, adopt a new process, make a different decision, or change how they work? This is where real business impact happens. That's why we see the call out at the bottom. Business impact lives here. So at the bottom is where the business impact lives. Opens and clicks are signals. They're useful indicators, but they're not the outcome leadership ultimately cares about. What leadership really wants to know is, did the message land? What changed and because of it? This is why measuring communication effectiveness means looking beyond engagement metrics and connecting messages to understanding and actions. At this point, I'm going to pause, see if there's any questions in the chat.
There are.
And there are. I will
There
pass it
are.
on over to Steve and we can ask some questions here.
Yeah, sure. So actually, there's a couple of questions that are perfectly timed for this slide and the slide before that we had. We had one question come in that was, what recommendations do you have to gather qualitative data, like understanding behavior change. And there's one that goes a lot like that I'll answer kind of both of these at the same time. Kimberly had a question in one of the examples you had above. What type of activities are you doing to know the employees who clicked had 2 times better understanding? So really what we're talking about here is using all of the information available to you. So when you're trying to look at behavior change and understanding, and we're actually going to create some dashboards and things like that as we move forward here. But it's really about understanding, maybe did the questions you're getting, did they change from what is this to how do I apply this, right? Are you seeing more adoption? Are you seeing, more completion of tasks? Are you getting fewer repeat errors, right? There are tools out there that allow you to analyze sentiment, and we're going to talk about that a little bit too. But are you seeing positive reaction from the organization, right? So understanding your audience's reactions, how are they behaving? And by doing that, you can take your surveys, but look a little bit deeper into what types of questions are we asking? Are you being asked? And then there was a couple in there about getting buy-in from colleagues and probably leadership as well. So we're definitely going to touch on that as we move forward. And then Alex, I see your question. Any tips on how to integrate focus group? I love that you have a focus group. That's fantastic. And a communication advisory council. The goal would be for us to better speak to those action leaders need to take versus activities employees are engaged with. We're going to kind of move forward into that a little bit now. So hopefully I answer your question as we go through. And if I don't, well, then we'll go back to it. But let's talk about the type of reporting you can do. So my goal here in our time together is to show you some reporting that you can do. We'll create one together, and we'll talk about how you can take all the great things Paul talked about and put it into action. So how do we connect these metrics to our business goals? So I love this little circular, everything I do has a circle to it, right? Because everything's connected. So we're going to start with our business goals. I think the business goals are really kind of where we want to begin. Our everything we do with our internal comms, right? You all know this has to kind of align with business goals from leaderships, business goals for the organization, everything like that. So we're going to start with our business goals, and then we're going to take it from there. When we talk about communication objective, this is going to define what communication is responsible for changing. Are we trying to, change behavior? Do we have a policy update? What is the objective of this particular campaign, or just a specific individual communication? What is the objective of this communication? Does it align with our business goal that we've worked on together? And then next in our circle is the metrics, right? Paul spent a lot of great time talking about how metrics, they're a signal, right? They're not really the story. So what metrics do we need to use and to take from our data to help answer the questions about our objective, right? Did we achieve our objective? So it's about picking and understanding the correct metrics that we want to use for a specific objective. And then what we want to do, right, is we got to turn those metrics into insights, right? And we're going to spend some time on that here on our next couple of slides, because I think before we dig into creating a dashboard, let's talk about how we go from a metric to an insight a little bit more in a little bit more detail. So in our first example, we're going to talk about, we'll use a change communication example. And I think really what we're looking at here is just how does the data turn into words, right? How do we tell the story with it? And so, in this little example, if we had to do some change management, we see that we've got a 72% of our employees open the message. Well, that's not, really telling us much, like Paul talked about, right? So what we could say here is that we achieved awareness, right? We got people to click on it. But again, doesn't really tell us much more beyond that, right? I always say open rates are just the beginning. They really don't tell us much other than that the email landed and that it was opened. And then in this example, we had a 51% read rate. And read rate is really one of the strongest signals that we have for understanding. And we have that because, I'll give you an example. Depending on the channel that you're using, right, you're going to measure read rate a little bit differently in each, whatever tool you're using to be able to measure whether it's email, Teams, Slack, intranet, right? All of that read time and how you're doing that. For us here at Polite Mail, just so you know that what we do is we measure a read to us is 30% of the content that we expect. So every email that goes out has an expected read time. We say if you hit more than 30% of that expected read time, that's a read, right? Generally enough time for me to know what your email is all about, which is obviously a great starting point. So when we're talking about read rate here, um, we could say that, employees engage deeply with the content, right? They did spend quite a good amount of time on that, right? So that's one way we can just take it, instead of saying, hey, we had 51% read rate. Let's just say employees engage deeply with the content. We know this because we had 51% of our audience read more than 30% of uh, the expected time. Our click-through rate, what's great about click-through, even though I still think it's a vanity metric, um, what's great about click-through is that it does show intent, right? Employees were actively looking to take the next step, learn more detail, right? We gotta add in that secondary piece, right? If we're having them click over to our intranet, we gotta have the clock start and know how much time they spent on that click. So there's a lot that goes into it, but it's a great intent, right? So for this, in this particular example, we had 18% click through rate. We had 18% of our audience have the interest to take the next step, right? Learn more details, and that's increased for us. So another way that you can show understanding and things like that is you're getting people to actually take the actions and click through. And then obviously when you're trying to do some change, you're trying to make change within your organization, whatever the change is, reinforcement always is going to improve that understanding and retention. So being able to document, how many sends did you do, how many channels did you use, what was successful and what was not successful. So this shows us kind of how the data can show us one thing. And as we look at our other example, we're going to see that the same data can show a completely different scenario, right? So in this case, in this particular, we're trying to do a mandatory policy update, right? That's our example that we chose. So we had 68% open rate. Again, tells us nothing. And in this case, what we can point out is that the initial awareness with a 60% open rate, 68% open rate, it's kind of lower than we expect for something that's mandatory, so we gotta figure out how to do that a little bit. A 29% read rate and a communication for a policy update, we got them to open it, but really they didn't engage much beyond just the open, right? So we didn't get a lot of people deeply engaging with the content. And so we got to look at that, right? So again, with an 8% click-through rate, not terrible, but for a mandatory policy update, right? What we're looking for is employees to progress to the next, take the action that we need to do, whether we need them to watch a video, whether we need them to take a test, whether we need them to just read some more information about it, right? Intranet pages, measuring your intranet, huge, right? So if you're seeing intranet page views drop, as you're going through these communication steps, it's really just telling you that people are not, so instead of just saying, hey, we had less, we had 25% less people on our page views, interest dropped quickly, right? After the initial, and then survey feedback. We all love surveys. Surveys are really important. Understanding, and kind of like I talked about with that first question, like what types of questions are you getting? Are you getting confused questions? Are you getting, I just don't like it questions and I want to do it a different way? Things like that. So really monitoring and understanding the survey feedback that you're getting so that you can kind of, make next steps and things like that. So speaking of next steps, let's talk a little bit about how do we now create a dashboard. So we're gonna do some storytelling. We're gonna create a dashboard, and hopefully, this is a dashboard that you could use in your own world. So we'll start with kind of what do we want to do? Well, when we have the metrics, those tell a story, right? We just have to figure out how we want to tell it. So there's 4 steps here that I think really make it easy as an outline to be able to kind of tell your story. So when we start with intent, right? So that's going to just be it's kind of the grounds for the conversation of what the goal for our leadership is going to recognize, right? What do we want to do? What does leadership want to see from the communication? Is it, our goal was to ensure employees understood some change coming up, right? And did they take the required action, right? Like, what is the intent of this entire, communication that we're about to embark on? Whether it's a single communication or a campaign, where you're going to have multiple communications out. The second step is the outcome, right? This is where your data is going to live. But really, we want to focus on just the data that's going to help support the story we need to tell. So, with all of your good data that you're going to collect, it's never you never want to skip the step where you're deciding, okay, what are the specific metrics that help tell the story that we need to tell? So that's your outcome. And then your meaning, right? So what back to kind of what Paul was saying, like, why does this matter? What does it mean? Right. So, maybe we got to say, maybe we got to where people needed to be from an understanding perspective of whatever it is we want them to do. Maybe we're not seeing as many questions and things like that. What are we seeing? Why does it matter? How does it go with our business goal? Right. So are we achieving our business goal? And then four, probably my favorite step is to be able to take this information and then, you know, recommend steps, right? Being the internal communications professional in your organization, you've got such a voice to be able to say, here's the next steps. Here's what we recommend based on this data, right? We had a goal. Here's where we're at so far. Here's what we recommend based on that data. And then that's really kind of what we want to do now. So we're going to put together an executive dashboard. We took a pretty real story from a pretty real customer. I'm going to pretend I'm the internal comms person. And really what the goal is here is we had to, I'll say we had a new product launch for our organization, right? So this was a scenario where this particular customer, who I am now their internal comms professional, new product launch, they had to really gain awareness and understanding of the new product from all of their employees, right? This is a new product for an organization. Your employees have to sell it, service it, support it, right? They have to know everything about it. They have to be confident in that. So communication plan was put into place, used multiple channels, multiple communication from multiple different angles and things like that, which we'll talk about. Some of the data that we're going to use to create our executive dashboard. Obviously, there was an email campaign, right? If you don't know, email is still the number one form of communication for organizations. So that, the typical, the ones we've talked about, right? Open rate, click rates, read rates. There were some calls to action that were there. They did some great videos. There was product outlines. There was actually a big push towards their intranet, which they had created a whole section on their internet, which you can see there. They did do an all employee staff meeting where they took questions after they, introduced it. And of course, they did a bunch of surveys as they were going through the process. So with this, armed with this type of data, now we want to put together an executive dashboard, if you will, to be able to kind of look at what we're doing. So here's an outline that we're going to follow. Really important here, a couple of things as important as what we're about to fill this document with when it comes to data and words and things like that. You'll notice that the layout means a lot. And the layout's going to matter just as much as what we're saying. So the first place we want to start with is intent, right? So we want their eyes, and here, we read top to bottom, left to right. So we want to start in that top left. So that top left box, the intent, that's going to be our business goal, right? We're tying it back. We're trying to speak the language of the leadership. So in our example here, our goal of this communication plan was to increase employee understanding of this new product, right? Awareness, understanding, everything about it. We try to get at least 75% of people to be able to, know what was going on with this product release. And so now let's take a look at kind of the next process here is the outcome, right? So we're not going to go to meeting. What we're going to do is we're going to go to the outcome. And really what the outcome is where those cherry picked metrics that tell our story is where we're going to put these. Notice we didn't leave with a bunch of numbers and a bunch of graphs and things like that. We just really wanted to be able to pick a couple of those that really meant, that really led to us establishing a meaning to our business goal, right? So here for this particular example, we chose overall communications and manager-led communication. So there were two aspects of the communications that were sent out. They did obviously overall internal comms, blast emails out to all employees at one time. And then they worked with each manager of the different departments and they did manager-led communication. So those two very valuable data points and charts that we can show. And then the questions, what we did is we tracked and we decided to use questions also as a point of understanding and where people are understanding. So as you can see in just this little chart here, questions did decrease over 3 weeks, right? So that does show a little bit of understanding. So what does it all mean, right? So what's the meaning of this? And again, this is where we want to be front and center, top of the line for our leadership to understand. and to see that, for this particular business goal, we've got it to 67%, right? The goal was 75%. So having this big, bold front and center on this page, if they take nothing else from this dashboard, they know that 67% of the organization has an understanding and awareness of this new product. And we're, that comfortable that we can go live with something with 67%. Obviously, 75% is the goal. Now, we can dig a little bit deeper here within that 67%, right? Let's take a look at kind of within that 67%, what was successful, right? So we want to give some bullet points. The manager-led communication, as you can see from the bar graph, boosted understanding to 74%. So that's a good chunk of our overall understanding came from our manager-led communications, right? Again, we see questions drop from 55 down 55% from week 1 to week 3, right? That's a very telling stat that people are understanding it. They're asking less questions. And then we had positive sentiment rose 40% over 3 weeks, right? So what's making them positive? Well, usually if I know more about something, I'm going to feel a little bit more positive about it, right? So that does help us look at, understanding, and is seeing some positive. The types of questions are being asked can show you that they're positive about it. Just overall excitement, enthusiasm. It's tough to be enthusiastic or excited about something or positive about something if you don't understand it. So really being able to look at your sentiment, and sentiment, just for a side note, sentiment really comes in handy if you're going to be doing some measurement of sentiment in your chat channels, whether you Slack, Teams, or other channels. There are plenty of tools out there to be able to kind of look at sentiment, especially with AI these days. It's really helpful. So the box for meaning is now that's our story, right? What are we seeing? Now, the fourth step in our storytelling process is to do some recommendations, right? So we want to recommend recommended actions. So our recommended actions, right? Obviously, we see the success from the manager-led communication, so we're going to expand that, right? So that's one of our recommendations to leadership, is to expand manager-led communications, because as we see, the data tells us that it worked, right? We didn't get questions down to 0. So we do have questions coming in. So what we want to do is we want to create a Q&A hub, right? That's the recommendation, right? So we can monitor 2 things. We can monitor the number of questions, right? Just the data, right? How are we getting? Are we seeing it, continuing to see a decrease in our questions? Also, as we've talked about a couple of times already, the types of questions. Are those questions now changing from I don't understand this to, well, how would I implement that, this in this scenario, right? So they understand it, but so really kind of taking a good look at the types of questions that you're getting is another way. And then obviously there's nothing better than feedback, right? If you want to know something, ask. So to continue in this case, one of the recommendations was continue the weekly feedback analysis, right? And again, that's types of questions. Are we staying positive? Are we seeing people engage? Are we being interactive about our learning about it? And things like that. So kind of reviewing our dashboard here, top left, we've got our goal. Then we supplied some data, right? That's going to be helpful and meaningful, not just, open data and things like that. How did we, do to our goal? Some nuggets there, right? In there to kind of point out, and then obviously the very important kind of recommended actions there. So cool little dashboard, try it out. You'll have a copy of it so you can kind of see where it goes. Some do's and don'ts. You're going to get a copy of this, and I won't spend a lot of time reading these bullets for you. I would say the top 2 are probably my go-to here, right? Lead with that insight baseline, right? You have a goal, you have an objective of that communication. Like Paul said, give away the end of the story right up front, right? And fill it all in afterwards. And then the don'ts, right? Don't just throw data on a screen with a bunch of charts and tables and things like that. But the rest of these you can kind of take a look at, so we can kind of keep moving along here. Do want to share one more chart with you. As I just said, this is not something you would start with, but having your data ready. Some of your leaders are probably different, right? Every human's different, but like maybe some of your leaders, they love this stuff. Maybe some leaders don't. So having this at the ready, and there's a couple of different areas where you can use a chart like this. In ours, here it says messaging subject. So you could use this as different campaigns, right? You have different email communications that you send out around different objectives and business goals and things like that. So you could have Um, you could do this for all of your annual, you had a return to work campaign, you had your employee retention program, things like that. So and this is where you're going to show, hey, here's the channels we used, here's the audience we reached, it's just the data, right? You want to have that ready. Another way you can use this is for each of your campaigns, you could then have kind of like a drill down, right? So if it was a return to work campaign, that we have here, maybe you can click on that return to work campaign. It drills down into each of the individual messages within that campaign, right? So you can say, okay, here's a email one went out. Here's our open rate readership, right? Then we did a Teams blast or a Slack blast. We did a survey. Here's the results of the survey. So really just always having the data at the ready for leadership, depending on your leaders and what works for them. Is really kind of what you want to kind of look at there. But just another example of how you can kind of organize your thoughts and have everything at the ready for if somebody's asking for it. Um, Kind of moving on to where do the insights come from? Quick little chart here. Really, all we're trying to do is match up behavior with kind of the insight, right? So if we're trying to, if our communication objective is understanding and recall of a specific topic, right? So we're going to look at read behavior, follow-up questions, surveys, right? The leadership insight we would have for that is, do employees understand what's changing and why, right? That's kind of the leadership angle you'll want to take. If you've got a behavior change, right, we're going to have people start doing something a completely different way, right? Are they completing tasks? Are you seeing wide adoption, right? Are you getting fewer repeat questions, right? So is your communication actually influencing the action, right? That'd be the leadership insight where we would go with that, right? Are we, look, hey, it's working. Feedback quality, comments, pulse responses, Q&A themes, again, going back to what types of questions people are asking, right? Leadership wants to know, are people confused about this, or do they understand what we're doing? If they're confused, then there's risk, right? So if we're trying to reduce risk, so we want to eliminate confusion. And then the manager effectiveness, like if you're doing a lot of manager-led communications, really helpful for leadership to know if managers are reinforcing messages, are they blocking messages and things like that. So it really gives you a kind of a overall understanding of what's working in that case. So that's kind of where that comes from. Talk about buy-in, right? So if we want to talk a little bit about buy-in and kind of what works and what doesn't, really, I think having this 4-step process will help with buy-in with leadership. I also think this will help with buy-in with colleagues, comms colleagues, or just colleagues in general, maybe somebody in HR or somebody, anybody who's part of the communication decision making and things like that. Really what buy-in comes from, in my perspective, is consistency in helping leadership make decisions, right? So we've got 4 steps here, right? So you want to first align your metrics to leadership priorities, right? A metric to a leader is only going to matter if it fits their goals, the organization's goals, and things like that. So really being able to select the metrics that matter to leaders. You're going to eliminate risk. You're going to show progress. You're going to see higher adoption of, whatever it is that you need them to adopt, and work efficiency and things like that. So that's a great way to start. Asking leaders what success looks like. It's probably the quickest way to get buy-in, right? Is to find out before you try to, trial and error. Just ask how they define success of your overall communications or a specific communication campaign. If it's a change communication and they just want to make sure that people are, doing an assigned task or whatever it may be, right? Understand what they're looking for, and that's going to be able to kind of help you get that buy-in. See, that's a help me help you thing, right? Like, what do you want to know? What do you want to see from our audience on this? Let me go help you do that. Everybody likes to be kind of worked like that. So be consistent and predictable. Keep a consistent dashboard. Just look and feel, right? Don't make them have to guess every time. So you want to have the dashboard have the same structure. You want the timing to have the same structure, right? Like maybe we're going to report monthly, or depending on the type of communication, right? Maybe it's a more frequent thing, or kind of just fall into what you're going to know what they want and how they like it, and then just staying consistent with that. And then really always bringing a recommendation. You may not have buy-in. They may not listen at first. They may not. it is what it is. Some leaders are different. Even in our organization, not all leaders are, open to recommendations, but doesn't stop me. I'll keep doing it. So metrics without recommendations create work because now they have to do that part of it. So if you're recommending and you're constantly saying, "Hey, here's what we should do. Here's what we should do," eventually that's going to create some serious momentum for you. And I think that's really awesome. And then I think my last side is like just building that long term credibility, right? So being proactive to help shape the strategy before decisions are locked is really the goal, right? So you want to be able to have a seat at that table before, I'm sure you've all been in a situation where there was a meeting. For some reason, they thought internal comms didn't need to be in that meeting. And then they come to you and they say, "Hey, go tell everybody this." Being able to kind of create this long term credibility by following the steps you see here really is going to drive you into the process a lot earlier. And then it just makes everybody's life easier. So I think when you can get leadership or even some of your comms colleagues to understand that when metrics are treated as a strategic asset, then internal communications moves from execution to influence, right? And now internal comms, you're now modern day influencers, which is really kind of cool. So um, I'm going to kick it back to Paul. Paul's going to give you some key takeaways. I, full disclosure, haven't looked at the Q&A in a long time, so I'll let you drive that.
Yeah, so we'll get to the Q&A real quickly, and we're gonna quickly jump on these key takeaways since I know we're coming up to time soon. But some key takeaways, if you're gonna take anything away from this webinar today, is insight over information. Metrics only matter when they explain what changed and why. Connection to business outcomes. When metrics are tied to business goals, they stop feeling optional and they start feeling essential. Storytelling. Storytelling turns data into decisions. Leaders trust communicators who consistently translate complexity into meaning. And metrics elevate the function. Leadership's ready metrics elevate internal communications. Strong metrics don't just support communication, they change how internal communication is perceived. You already have the data. What makes the difference is how you frame it and what you're going to do with it. And really, what can you do today? Before we close, I really want you to think, uh, what's one report that you could change tomorrow using the approach that we've talked about today? So here are a few things that we want to leave you with for action items that you can hopefully begin doing immediately. No tools required. Discover. Number one is discover. Start by auditing what already exists. What reports, dashboards are you using? Are they actually driving decisions or just reporting activity? And most importantly, does leadership already care about that? Start there. Number two is align. Next, connect communication goals directly to business goals. Be clear on the behavior you're trying to influence. And define success that way leadership would define the way that leadership would define it, not just how communications defines it. Three, gather. Focus on metrics internally. Focus on metrics internally. Focus on signals that show real progress, engagement, quality, behavior shifts, feedback trends, not just volumes and clicks. Number four is develop. Answer the three questions. What's changed? Why does it matter? And what should we do next? That's the difference between reporting and advising. And finally, number five, socialize. Invite feedback early. Identify partners and sponsors, and standardize your reporting so leaders know what to expect and how to read it. I want to close with this. This isn't about building something massive overnight. It's about taking small, intentional steps that move communications from activity reporting to strategic impact. We all can do it. And once we do make that change, leadership is going to buy in. So that said, I do want to open up the floor to some questions. We have quite a few, so I'm going to start right away. I think the one we left off on was Allison's. What are some common ways understanding is measured?
Yeah, so I think with that, it's obviously the surveys that we talked about, right? Understanding the types of questions that people are asking. Are you getting action, right? Is action being taken? kind of tie that into a little bit about there was a newsletter question. Yes, communications are often sent through email newsletters and many content. How can I accurately measure the impact of the message within newsletters? Calls to action, right, are the same, and I would say the same thing back to Allison's questions, right? When you have calls to action, are people taking time to click on those calls to action? If they are going to a SharePoint or an intranet site to be able to read more information. Right now, we're being able to see, okay, who went to it, then when they were there, how much time did they spend, and then are you getting and then continuing to do those that feedback analysis through surveys and things like that. I do want to mention, Paul. I believe I confirmed that we are going to take all of these questions and we're going to answer them in writing, and then we're going to put them all into the follow-up documents because I
Perfect.
know there's no way that we're going to get through them in the next 5 minutes. So if you've asked a question here, just when you get the follow-up documents, look for your specific question, and that we will have that answered for you in that
Perfect.
because we be very time conscious of everybody's time. So
Awesome. So Emily asked, and I can actually answer this one. I've often seen communications as expected to overcome faulty programs and processes. The ask is for more and better communications when the real barrier for success are challenges with the program process. How can comm staff handle these situations? Um, Emily, we do actually have, ironically, um, a webinar coming up. I want to say it's next week. And one way that you can do this is building an internal comms audit. So the short answer you would be engagement data, feedback patterns, and behavior signals that can distinguish communications, essentially. So really, for example, repeated questions despite multiple messages going out, or managers messaging going out, or managers in struggling to reinforce policies because messaging is unclear, and so on and so forth. So we will be doing a comms audit webinar that talks about identifying the friction points on where communication breakdowns are, and then using that data to suggest improvements to the process. So I think that's February 18th is our comms audit webinar. So we can get you out that link, or you can just look for that link on our website and we can get you guys signed up. Another question was, how does Flightmail accurately gauge read time? We really base read time. It's calculated based on the time to read each message. Those that spent 30% of the message or read time, at least 30% of the read time is considered a read. We base the read time on the number of images, text, and the Flesch Kincaid reading score as well. Lots of questions coming in. I love it. Awesome. Question from Amber. Where would understanding and question data come from? Surveys, question mark. Steve, I'll let you answer that one.
yes, pulse surveys, and then you can do pulse surveys. You can do town hall meetings. You can. I've had some customers who use again Slack or Teams and set up a channel there where people can go and just ask questions to the whole audience and things like that. So it's really about just soliciting that feedback, whether that's through managers or just through overall communication, right? So maybe managers collect the questions, or you just you connect with managers and hey, what questions, what are people asking questions about, things like that. Some people, it depends on the person, right? How they want to get their questions answered and things like that. So surveys, feedback analysis from managers and things like that.
That said, we have time for one more question. I'm going to ask it for you, Steve. Are there any other ways to measure understanding or impact other than surveys?
Ooh, it's a great question. Yeah, I mean, I think just open communication. You're going to be able to. You kind of have to look at the overall analysis, right? If you got to be able to measure sentiment. If you can measure your sentiment, right? Like I mentioned earlier, I'm never going to like something I don't understand. And then if I'm asking questions about it and things like that, so be able to measure sentiment, and that can happen in many different ways, right? Your chat channels. I think I keep saying your chat channels for sentiment because that's like the water cooler talk. That's where people are a little bit more free with their conversations other than email. Emails are very transactional communication, whereas, I think a chat or a Slack is going to let people be a little bit more free. But we are up on time, so I will answer that more in our
Yes. So
follow-ups.
we will get all those questions answered. We do thank you for joining us here on this webinar today. Look for more information in regards to the internal comms audit webinar that we are conducting next week. We'll send it on in the follow-up. So thank you guys, and we hope you guys have a good rest of your day.
Thank you.